A woman walked across wet mud in New Mexico. She was carrying a child. She set the child down, picked it back up, and kept going. Her footprints survived, and when the lab dated the layers that sealed them, the number came back around 23,000 years, more than 10,000 years before people were supposed to be in the Americas at all. That was the first problem. Then came Chile, then Florida, then a mastodon in a museum drawer. The old timeline did not collapse in public. It retreated, quietly, and almost nobody was ever asked to explain why. The place is called the Tularosa Basin. Today it is a white gypsum desert inside a missile range, and the wind moves the dunes around like water. But once, this was a lakeshore, soft, wet, the kind of ground that takes an impression and then holds it. The tracks there are called ghost prints. Most of the time you cannot see them at all. The sediment has to be exactly right, a certain moisture, a certain angle of light, and then the shapes rise out of the ground like something surfacing. And they are not smears, they are feet, bare feet. You can see toes, you can see the arch, you can see the pressure ridge where the weight rolled forward and pushed the mud up in front of the heel. These are not vague depressions that a hopeful archaeologist decided to call human. They are the mechanics of a body in motion, frozen in place. Then researchers followed one particular trackway. It ran for roughly a mile. The person was young, small. The gait was uneven, a lopsided load carried on one hip, shifted occasionally to the other, and at intervals along the trail, the load was set down. Because beside the adult prints, in those spots, there are the prints of a toddler. Little feet milling around in the mud while whoever was carrying them rested. Then the small feet stop, and the adult prints go heavy again on one side. That is not data, that is a day. Sloth tracks cross the trail, mammoth tracks stamp over the top of it. And the whole scene had been sitting there, sealed and patient, while an entire scientific model was built on the assumption that nobody was standing there at all. Then they dated the mud. Here is how you date a footprint, and here is why it matters so much. You cannot date a footprint. A footprint is an absence, a hole where a person used to be. So you date what is under it and what is over it, and the print has to belong somewhere in between. At White Sands, the layers were full of the seeds of an aquatic plant called Ruppia. Seeds in the layer below the prints. Seeds in the layer above them. The prints were sandwiched. The seeds went to the lab. The radiocarbon dates came back. And the human tracks landed in a window of roughly 23,000 to 21,000 years ago. Take a second with that number. 21,000 years ago is the last glacial maximum. The ice sheets are at their absolute widest. Two of them, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran, have fused into a continental wall across the north. There is no corridor. There is no gap. According to the model that dominated American archaeology for most of a century, there's nobody south of that ice. Not a single person. The first Americans are supposed to arrive around 13,000 years ago, walking through a corridor that opens as the ice melts, carrying beautiful fluted stone points that get named after a town in New Mexico called Clovis. Clovis, in New Mexico, roughly 200 miles from where these footprints are. And here is why the footprints hit differently than any stone tool ever could. A tool can move. A tool can fall down a crack, get kicked by a burrowing animal, wash downslope, get redeposited by a flood into older sediment. Every early site argument in American archaeology had been fought over exactly that possibility. A footstep cannot move. It is not an object in the ground. It is the ground. And this was not published in some fringe outlet. It was published in Science in 2021. The field had a problem, so it went after the seeds. The counterattack was not stupid. That is the part people get wrong when they tell the story. Ruppia is an aquatic plant. It lives underwater. And underwater, in a lake fed by groundwater moving through old limestone, the dissolved carbon can be ancient, thousands of years older than the water itself. A plant drinking that carbon builds it into its tissue, which means the plant can be born already looking old. It is called the hard water reservoir effect. It is real. It is a legitimate objection. Critics said the seeds could be inflating the age by thousands of years, and that the footprints might be much younger, maybe even comfortably inside the accepted window. That is honest science. That is what peer review is supposed to do. But watch the shape of the objection, because you have to understand something about this field to understand what happened next. The word contamination has done more damage to American archaeology than any hoax ever did. You do not have to destroy an inconvenient discovery. You do not have to hide it or suppress it or hold a secret meeting about it. You only have to suggest that the sample is dirty. Doubt is free. It costs nothing to say a layer might have been disturbed. It costs a career to prove it wasn't. And this exact objection had a history. It had been aimed at a rock shelter in Pennsylvania. It had been aimed at a bog in Chile. It had been aimed at caves in Oregon. Same words, same shape, different decade. One anomaly is an error. 6 anomalies is a map. To understand why the White Sands footprints made people this angry, you have to go back to the man they tried to bury first. Southern Chile, a creek called Chinchihuapi. In the mid-1970s, a peat bog started giving up things that peat bogs preserve and normal dirt destroys. Wood. Not stone, wood. The remains of a long structure with a wooden frame. Hearths. Cordage that somebody knotted. Mastodon meat still on the bone. And chewed seaweed, 9 different species of it. Some of it medicinal, some of it from a coastline more than 50 miles away. Somebody carried seaweed inland. Somebody was sick and chewed a plant for it. The dates came back around 14,500 years. Now, do the geography. Monteverde is at the far southern end of South America. It is something like 10,000 miles from the Bering Land Bridge. If people were living there 14,500 years ago, then they entered the continent long before that, and the whole Clovis first structure is not just wrong, it is wrong by an unknown and probably enormous margin. Tom Dillahay spent the next 2 decades defending that site. Not 2 years, 2 decades. His methods were questioned. His stratigraphy was questioned. It was suggested the wood was natural, the structures were imagined, the layers were mixed. In 1997, a group of prominent archaeologists, including some of the most respected skeptics in the discipline, flew to Chile to look at the site with their own eyes. They agreed with him, and even that did not end it. One of the most influential critics later published fresh doubts anyway. Monteverde did not win an argument. It outlived one. Which brings us to Pennsylvania, and to a man who got the same treatment for longer. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter sits above a creek about 30 miles from Pittsburgh. James Adovasio started digging it in 1973, and he dug it with a precision that even his enemies conceded was close to obsessive. Fine screening, meticulous stratigraphy, layer after layer stacked in perfect order with dozens of radiocarbon dates that lined up exactly the way they should. Younger on top, older at the bottom, no scrambling, no chaos. And in the deepest human levels, the dates ran past 16,000 years, some pushed toward 19,000. Under the old model, that was impossible, so there had to be a reason it was wrong. The reason offered was coal. There are coal seams in the region, ancient carbon, geologically dead, potentially drifting as particulate into the sediment and poisoning the radiocarbon dates, making everything look older than it was. So Adovasio tested for it, and tested again, and ran the samples again, and found no coal contamination in the dated material. Same answer. They asked again, same answer. That was the problem. He spent an entire career, an entire adult life, defending a set of numbers that would have been unremarkable if they'd come back 4,000 years younger. And this is where I want to be precise, because this is not a movie. Nobody stole his notes, nobody burned his samples, there was no committee, there didn't need to be one. That is the thing about a dominant model in a small field. It doesn't have to attack you, it just has to make you expensive. Every conference talk becomes a defense. Every grant application has to answer the same objection. Every paper gets an extra round of scrutiny that a conventional site would never face. Young researchers watch what happens to you, and they quietly decide to work on something safer. Adovasio was not arguing about carbon. He was arguing that the map was wrong, and then the map fell apart on its own. The entire Clovis first model rested on one road, the ice-free corridor, a gap opening between the two great ice sheets, letting hunters walk down from Beringia into the heart of the continent around 13,000 years ago. So researchers went and looked at the corridor. They pulled sediment cores from the lakes along the route. They looked at ancient DNA in the mud, at pollen, at plant and animal traces, trying to answer a simple question. When did this corridor actually become a place a human being could survive? The answer was around 12,600 years ago. Read that again. The road did not become livable. No plants, no game, nothing to eat, nothing to burn until after the moment the model required people to walk down it. The corridor was not an entrance, it was a late exit. And out in Idaho, on a terrace above the Salmon River, Lauren Davis was excavating a place called Cooper's Ferry. Stone tools, hearths, butchered animal bone. Dates around 16,000 years, a couple of thousand years before that corridor was open at all. And the tools were not Clovis points, they were stemmed points, a different tradition, sitting on a river system that runs to the Pacific. Here is the honest twist, and I am keeping it in on purpose, because I'm not selling you heroes and villains. Lauren Davis, whose own site helped break the old model, is also among the researchers who publicly challenged the White Sands dates. This is not a conspiracy. This is worse. This is a discipline arguing with itself under pressure, where every single person can be acting in good faith and the machine still crushes the evidence that arrives early. If they didn't walk down the corridor, they came another way, and that way is underwater. Florida, the Osceola River, Blackwater, near zero visibility, alligators in the shallows. Divers go down into a sinkhole in the riverbed with hand lights and dig by feel. They brought up a mastodon tusk. On the tusk were cut marks, deep, parallel, deliberate. The kind of marks you make when you are levering a tusk out of a skull with stone tools, because the ivory is worth having and you have decided to take it. The site is called Page-Ladson. It was worked in the 80s and 90s, largely dismissed, and then re-excavated in the 2010s with modern methods. The dates came back around 14,550 years. Older than Clovis, in Florida, on the wrong side of a continent, in the wrong millennium. But forget the date for 1 second and look at where it was. That tusk was underwater. Nobody was ever going to trip over it. No highway cut was going to expose it. It survived because it fell into a hole that filled with water and sediment and stayed sealed while everything on the surface was scoured away. And that raises a question that quietly poisons the entire century of searching that came before it. We looked for the earliest Americans on the land that exists now. During the last glacial maximum, sea level was roughly 120 meters lower than it is today. The coastline was miles out from where it is now. Every beach, every estuary, every river mouth, every place a coastal people would actually have lived is now underwater. We spent 100 years searching the attic and calling the house empty. So what happens when you actually check the coast? Santa Rosa Island, off the coast of California. In 1959, a set of human remains came out of an eroding bank there. Later dating put them around 13,000 years old, among the oldest human remains in the Americas. The island was bigger back then. It was closer to the mainland, but it was still an island. Even at the lowest sea levels, you could not walk there. Somebody crossed open water. In 1979, a geographer named Knut Fladmark argued that the first Americans came down the Pacific coast, around the ice, not through it. It was not a fringe idea. It was a reasonable one, and the field mostly filed it away for a couple of decades, because the corridor story was tidy and the coastal story required something the model was reluctant to grant ancient people: boats. Later it got a better name: the Kelp Highway, a continuous belt of kelp forest running from Japan around the North Pacific Rim and down the Americas. The same fish, the same shellfish, the same seals and seabirds the whole way. A migration route with a built-in supermarket for anyone who could handle a small boat. We do not have those boats. We probably never will. Wood and hide do not last 20,000 years, and the beaches they were dragged onto are 100 meters below the surface. The absence of evidence was engineered by the ocean, and we mistook it for the absence of people. Which brings us back to New Mexico, and to the test the critics did not expect. Because the footprint team did not sulk. They went back and did the one thing that ends a reservoir effect argument permanently. They threw the water plants away. In 2023, they published again. This time they dated conifer pollen, pine pollen, pulled from the exact same layers, tens of thousands of grains, isolated for a single measurement. Pine trees do not drink ancient groundwater carbon. They breathe air. There is no hard water effect in a pine tree. Then, because that alone might not be enough, they ran a completely different method on the same sediment, optically stimulated luminescence. That technique does not care about carbon at all. It measures how long it has been since a grain of quartz last saw sunlight since the moment it was buried in the dark. Different plant, different lab, different physics. Same answer, roughly 23,000 to 21,000 years. The debate is not finished. Some researchers still push back on the geology and the water history of that basin, and they are entitled to. But 3 independent lines of evidence now point at the same window, and the burden has flipped. It is no longer on the footprints to prove they exist. It is on the model to explain them. And here is what happens when a ceiling comes off. In 1992, a construction crew widening a freeway in San Diego cut into a bed of broken mastodon bone. Alongside the bone were heavy stones. The salvage team collected everything, boxed it, and shelved it. It sat in museum storage for over 20 years. Then, in 2017, a team published uranium-thorium dates on that bone in Nature. The number they got was around 130,000 years, and they argued the bones had been deliberately smashed by hominins, using those stones as hammers and anvils. I need to be extremely clear here. Most archaeologists do not accept this. The objections are serious and specific. Heavy machinery was working on that site. Bones can break in natural ways that mimic percussion, and there are no stone tools, no hearths, no human bone, no DNA, nothing but broken bone and rocks. If it were right, it would not bend the timeline. It would snap it. I am not telling you it is true. I am telling you why it matters. For most of a century, that claim could not even have been published. The ceiling was too low. Nobody would have run the dates. And once the ceiling came off, once White Sands and Monte Verde and Page-Ladson pried the roof up, every claim that had been pressed flat underneath it came up for air at once. That is what a collapsing consensus actually looks like from the inside. Not clarity, chaos. And the evidence sat in a drawer for 20 years. Ask yourself how many other drawers there are. And then the DNA started saying things nobody had a root for. In Montana, in 1968, a construction crew found the burial of an infant boy covered in red ochre, laid down with more than 100 stone and antler tools. He is around 12,700 years old, and he is the only Clovis-era burial we have. His genome was published in 2014, and in one sense, it vindicated the old story. He is closely related to most indigenous peoples across North and South America. The Clovis population was real, and it was ancestral to a lot of people. But a Clovis child having descendants does not mean Clovis came first. It only means Clovis was there. Then Alaska produced something stranger. Human remains from a site in the Tanana River turned out to belong to a population that split off early and simply stayed, a branch that never went south, that has no living descendants, and that nobody knew existed. Ancient Beringians, a whole people who exist only as a genetic ghost. And then there is the one nobody can explain. Some indigenous groups in the Amazon, Surui and Caritiana, carry a faint but statistically stubborn genetic signal that links them to populations in Australasia, not to Siberia, not to East Asia, to the other side of the Pacific. It is real, it is published, it has been replicated, and there is no accepted route that puts it there. This is not aliens, this is not a lost super civilization. It is something more damaging to a textbook than either of those, because it is boring and it is documented. The peopling of the Americas was not one wave, one root, and one people. The family tree was braided. So who was walking at White Sands 21,000 years ago? We do not know. We have their feet, and we do not have their name, so let me lay it out straight, because you deserve to know exactly where the line is. Established, people were in the Americas thousands of years before Clovis. Monteverde is accepted. Page-Ladson is accepted. Pre-Clovis is now the mainstream position, not the fringe one. The ice-free corridor was not the first door in, because it wasn't open yet. Contested, the precise age of the White Sands footprints, though it has now survived 3 independent dating approaches. The deepest levels at Meadowcroft, a cave in Mexico called Chiquihuit, where the stones may be tools or maybe nothing. Speculation. The Caruti mastodon at 130,000 years. Most researchers reject it, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That is the honest ledger. Now here is the part that should bother you. Clovis first did not die in public. There was no press conference, no retraction, no moment where the field stood up and said, "We held that line for 60 years, and we were wrong, and we made it expensive for the people who told us so." It died in revised captions, in softened textbook sentences, in museum panels quietly rewritten to say "at least" instead of "around," in new papers that discuss pre-Clovis sites in a calm, neutral tone, as if the fight had never been ugly, as if Dillahay had not spent 20 years defending a bog, as if Adovasio had not spent a lifetime answering the same question about coal. Nobody who spent decades calling those men reckless has ever been asked to explain themselves. There is no mechanism that would ever require it. The model didn't lose, it just stopped being mentioned. Go back to the gypsum. The wind is still moving out there. The prints appear when the moisture is right and vanish when it isn't, surfacing and disappearing like something that hasn't decided whether it wants to be found. And in one of those trails, a young woman is still carrying a child across a lake shore that no longer exists. She sets the child down. She picks the child back up. Her weight shifts, her hip drops, and she keeps walking. A giant sloth crosses her path and turns, and you can see in the tracks that it noticed her. She was not a data point. She was somebody's whole afternoon. And the argument was never really about whether she was there. She was there. The ground kept her. The real question is the one that is still open. How did her people get here? How long had they been here before that morning? What did the coastline look like when they arrived? The coastline that is now 100 meters below the surface of the Pacific, silted over, ground down by 20,000 years of surf. And how many more of them are sitting in a cardboard box in a museum basement, mislabeled, unfunded, waiting for someone willing to say the date out loud? The old story was not stupid. It was built from what people had. It was just too small. The wind is already moving the sand back over her footprints. It kept her for 21,000 years. It only took us a century to nearly lose her again.